And tonight, we have an event called Question Everything. I want to tell you a story of why this event is called Question Everything. A few months ago, we had an event with an author named Peter Sims. If you know the book Little Bets, he's done a lot. He was part of the D School for a time. We had an event with him. He's a good friend and a mentor of mine. And we did this panel where I was asking him questions, having a great conversation. Halfway through, he stopped answering my questions. He just flat out would not answer what I had to give him. And what he did instead is he was putting questions back to the audience, because he knew that the curiosity in the back of his brain was much more powerful than anything that I had to give him. And so what it inspired me to do was, Siri wants me to check something out. I'm not going to. So it made me think, what if we had an entire series of events where instead of me just peppering some people with questions, we had some incredible people working on some incredible initiatives, come with their own questions, and we explore them together. How does that sound? Yeah? Yeah? So this is on behalf of Alpha. Alpha is an on-demand insights platform. We're helping some of the world's largest brands experiment and test and validate some of their wildest new ideas, and it's been an incredible journey to work for them. I, as the head of community, get to work with the people that make that all happen, which is an incredible mandate, and I take it very seriously, because I get to work with folks like you, folks who want to be adventurous in their daily jobs, who want to be more generous with their time, who want to be empowered and empower others to build incredible things and answer incredible questions. So with that, we're building this global community, an Alpha community, that consists of people like you, that are corporate innovators, that are product managers, that are founders, that are artists, that are actors, that are people that are working on just amazing things. And it is, again, just such an honor to have all of you in this space. So the way that tonight is going to run, it's not just going to be networking, panel networking, although you are welcome to grab more drinks and chat with each other. But we're structuring tonight like this. We're going to have a little chat. We're going to hear from some incredible leaders in the community building space, in the belonging space. Then they're going to pose a question to you, and then we're going to discuss it, right? So you're going to get to know the people around you. We're going to have some kind of great insights, and we're going to have some great experiments and some great, really, thoughts kind of bubble to the surface. And we're all going to leave a little bit more empowered. How does that sound? Yeah. That sounds good? And then you can have some drinks afterwards. That's why the little emoji's there. So, without further ado, it is, I say the word honor a lot, it's because I mean it. It is an honor to have the two people that we have with us tonight, Tony Bacigalupo and Jillian Richardson. So give them some love. So Jillian founded an organization called The Joy List, and over the last couple of years, it has now grown into a community of almost 10,000 New Yorkers that are looking for opportunities to feel less lonely, go to an event, and leave with a friend, right? So that brand has now evolved into a book that's called Unlonely Planet. It's incredible, and is now evolving into some new initiatives that we're going to be exploring tonight. Tony, back in 2007, was the founder of Manhattan's first co-working space called New Work City. Yeah, let's show some love for New Work City. I like that. So, New Work City was in all the press. You can read about it in the New York Times and NPR and The Observer and Entrepreneur and Inc. Now he is collaborating with Jillian on a new initiative this year to make 1 million people find belonging. So with that in mind, help me welcome up Jillian and Tony. It's awesome to have you here. So I first met you, both of you, a couple months ago, and you were talking about this initiative to help 1 million people find belonging this year, right? Belonging is such a broad word. And so I want to dive in first of why is it so important for people to find belonging, to foster belonging?
Yeah, so the reason we wanted to talk about finding belonging is because, as a lot of you know, I really care about reducing loneliness in the world. Loneliness is a huge public health crisis. It impacts early mortality just as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. But the problem is when we both started thinking about how do we create a campaign that reduces loneliness, loneliness is in the negative. People don't want to really broadly talk about how they're lonely. As much as I'm trying to reduce the stigma around it, it's still something that people aren't super pumped to shout from the rooftops, their experience of loneliness. But everyone can own that they want to find more belonging. It's kind of the inverse of loneliness. And so to say, okay, how can we do the opposite of being lonely? How can we feel like we belong to ourselves? How can we feel like we belong to our friends and our community? Because that's a really exciting question that a lot of people can get behind.
Yeah.
And it's a tribal need. It's part of our human needs. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's just above shelter and basic survival is love and belonging. And so we, as kind of tribal creatures from our kind of like cave person days, right? If you didn't have a group of people to help with your survival, if you didn't kind of like get along with other people, you were going to starve, or you were going to get eaten by wolves or something. You know,
Sure.
like you weren't going to make it. So we have it baked into our nature that we have to belong. And if we don't find it in a healthy way, we will create it or find it in maybe an unhealthy way, or we'll be manipulated into finding it in bad ways. And so that's kind of leading to a lot of the bad things that we're seeing going on in the world right now. Part of why we're trying to do this is to help people kind of find it in a healthier way.
Sure. You pulled out the term loneliness epidemic, right? Why is this an epidemic? And how does it kind of affect us on a personal level, and maybe even on a professional level?
Yeah, so I feel like loneliness is such an epidemic because it's tied to so many diseases, and it's a thing that impacts a ton of Americans. Just to give some more stats, I always feel weird because I'm like, these are all really sad bummer statistics. I'm just gonna like bum all of you out right now. Is the average American has one close friend. 75% of Americans are not satisfied with the friendships that they do have. So that's saying, zoom out, you have one friend probably, and you probably don't like that friend. It's not great. It's really not great. And then also, when you look at, I know we're
You're welcome to leave whenever
yeah,
you're
we're like,
ready.
also, like,
So.
I hate this woman. She's making me sad. So when we think about, okay, there's this many people in America who are lonely, at the same time, we're spending a third of our lives at work. And so there's clearly a connection between loneliness and the workplace.
Sure.
And if you're someone who runs a company, you want to make sure your employees are happy and healthy, not just for their own benefit, but because they're going to be showing up at the office, giving their full energy, they're going to be there more often. If you have employees who are dropping off because they're more susceptible to heart disease, to depression, these are all things that loneliness are directly connected to. It's not good news for anyone.
Sure. I'm guessing there's some sort of personal moment that really drew you to this work, and I'm curious to hear what that is for both of you.
Oh my goodness. Personal moment?
Sure.
I'd say all of my childhood. I just feel like, I don't know, I was very fortunate. I don't think I realized how fortunate I was growing up as a kid in the suburbs, you know, like I was very, very fortunate, but I did not feel like I fit in my school. I didn't feel like I got along with the kids, or that I had my people. And when I started my co-working space, I gave this big speech, and there was a reporter there, and she totally pegged me when she wrote the article. She's like, he gave this speech as if he had finally found his seat at the lunch table. And it was so true. This is exactly what it was. It's like I couldn't find my seat at the lunch table, so I had to make my own table. And that's basically what the co-working space was.
Sure.
So it was just this visceral desire to feel like I could find somewhere I could go where I felt like I could have that table where I belonged.
Yeah.
And it happened to be for me that as somebody who was working from home and losing my mind, being cooped up in my house all day, when I went and co-worked for the first time, before there were co-working spaces in New York, and there was this little group called Jelly that met in some guy's living room in Midtown, right? And I sat on this guy's couch. But that day I hung out with people my age who worked for themselves, who were kind of a little bit off the beaten path. And it was the first time I really felt like I belonged in a way that really kind of resonated with me. And that's what sent me on this incredible journey to build a physical space. But the physical space was really all about the people being able to get together and feel the same way that I felt.
Sure.
And then inspiring other people to build similar spaces.
Well, speak more on New Work City. So, it was all kind of founded from this sense of belonging, but talk about how it expanded and really what spoke to people about the work that you were doing and the work that you continue to do in helping to create these sort of belonging spaces all over the world.
Sure. So it's no coincidence. I think the word co-working as we know it today started in San Francisco in 2005, and it became this kind of decentralized movement. Anyone could start a co-working space or a co-working group. You don't even need a space to do it. anywhere in the world, and nobody owns the copyright to it. It's a decentralized movement. Coworking.org if you want to learn more about that. But the beauty of it is that it's not a coincidence. Around that time was when a critical mass of people started getting laptops and Wi-Fi, which we take for granted now, but we started getting untethered. And so this idea of work being this thing you had to do at an office where the work happens, we started, disintermediating from that. And so we said, well, we don't have to do it there. Maybe we do it from home, but now we're going to start to reorganize. And so we just naturally started to say, well, if I can work from anywhere, I'm going to start working from where I want to work. And so people started to kind of create these new kinds of communities. It was a very emergent phenomenon. And so I started noticing the loneliness epidemic at first from the perspective of what I was dealing with, which was working from home. And that's now grown to this massive, massive thing. And WeWork's taken up a lot of the oxygen in the co-working world the last 10 years, but I think you will see in the next 10 years, as their kind of PR honeymoon fades, that they're actually a very small part of a very big movement. There are a few hundred spaces. Co-working is 25,000 spaces this year. And so we're talking about mostly small, local, independent spaces. My space was just down the block. We're at 588. I was at 412 Broadway, and it was similar loft space to this. And there's lots of these little places where people are getting together. And what I'm curious about is how we can better activate those local community spaces to be gathering places for all kinds of fun stuff, the way that we did at my space.
Well, and I love it because you've really innovated in the physical space, whereas Jillian, you've done a lot of innovating in the virtual space, right?
Yeah.
With the Joy List. So talk about your journey through why Joy List exists and then how the book came about.
Yeah, so for me, the Joy List really started after Trump got elected in November 2016, where how all great things began.
Thanks, Trump.
Yeah, thanks. It was really interesting because when I moved to New York City, I didn't feel like I belonged. Similar to Tony, I had the experience of not really feeling like I had my people. I had kind of activity-based friends, but nobody who I felt like I could really drop my walls and be vulnerable and safe with them. And I took a year and a half to really just do a ton of stuff by myself, like festivals by myself, conferences by myself, events by myself, until I had finally found my people in New York City. And I really deeply believed that I could have friends who lift me up and make me feel really good about myself. And then it was this very interesting juxtaposition of, I feel like, oh, the world is filled with love and New York City is incredible and all these people are amazing. And then Trump gets elected and everyone around me is like, I feel like I can't trust people, the world is on fire, like everything is terrible, everyone is terrible. And it was just like understandably so. I understood how people could say that. And I just wanted people to know, any day of the week in New York City, if they feel like they can't trust people, there are at least two things going on every day of the week where you could be in community and connection and feel supported. So that's why I started the newsletter, was to be like, hey, here are these things I wish I knew existed when I moved to New York City. Hopefully it'll be helpful for all of you. And then I kept doing it because this bizarre thing began to happen where like people would show up to me at parties and say, are you like that Joy List person? I'd say, yeah. And then they would just share this deeply personal story with me of their experience of not feeling like they belong. And people who didn't even live in New York City started emailing me, telling me about their experience of being deeply lonely and disconnected. And that's when I realized how much of an issue this is in America. Is I started Googling, as we all would do, and it was just like, wait, this is a huge problem that I have literally never heard someone talk about before. So I'm gonna keep doing this thing.
Sure.
And that's also how the book evolved, is I had a mentor say to me, if you want to be an expert in something, and if you really want to see, if you want to commit your life to something, write a book about it. See if you like hanging out with that type of person, and then see if you can commit to it in the long term. So kind of the book for me, it was an exploration for myself to see, do I want to commit to community building? Like, is this my personal ministry? And also, I didn't see any books written by young people about being lonely, and Gen Z and millennials are the loneliest generations, and there was nothing written by us about our problem. And I was like, I don't know, I'm 24 years old, so I don't know if I can write a book. But then someone was telling me, that's exactly why you should write the book. You don't see any books written by someone your age about this issue. That's your issue. So that was why I did it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, and it really builds this sense of you saw a mandate and you took it, right? And you saw this purpose that was so that just needed to be done, and you seized upon it, right? Which I think is fantastic. So what I think I'd love to hear, and because we have such a diverse audience, right, that's listening, and just a show of hands, how many of you manage a team? At least have one person that works alongside you or are collaborating with you, right? That's most, isn't it? Because it feels like this is like an ideal place to be, right? Where people are being vulnerable with you, where they're being authentic with you, where they want to, they immediately want to dive deeper and have this sense of belonging. So let's tease some of this out. Based on your experience, what are some, call them tips or tricks, or call them just lessons on how to foster belonging? Let's start with teams, on teams that either you manage or that you're a part of. Let's start there.
Yeah. So one tip that I have, I gave a talk at this conference called CMX about how to reduce loneliness in the workplace. It was so fun to create this talk and talk to all these professional community builders around what was helpful. And one really big thing that I found was redefining mentorship, because kind of in the workplace you think of mentorship as just career mentorship, and it's very kind of stale and sterile, and you don't get into anything vulnerable. But to reframe that and say, okay, you're going to be in partnership with people for, again, they're spending a third of their life at work. Like, they might be spending more time with you than they're spending with their children or their partner or their friends. They probably are. So you might as well have a meaningful relationship with that person. And what I proposed was kind of redefining mentorship, because there's this other stat from the National Mentoring Partnership that 16 million young Americans do not have mentors. And when I saw that, I was just like, their definition of mentor must be really specific, like some super high bar for what a mentor is. And it turns out a mentor is literally just someone who provides support. So there's these millennials who feel like they don't have any friends and they don't have any mentors. So there's just this deep, deep human craving for being supported and kind of shown a path. So to say, what if your boss in work, you also felt comfortable enough to talk about your spiritual life, talk about what's going on in your family, talk about what's going on in your relationships. And you might not be comfortable with that, and that's okay. But to say, how can we permission people to do this more? And there's a lot of companies that are starting to create spaces for those types of conversations, because unfortunately, we're not having them outside of the workplace a lot. So I personally think in companies, it's their responsibility to learn how to create a safe space for those kinds of vulnerable conversations.
Sure.
And just to build on that, I'd say the emphasis is on people feeling like they are seen, that they've really been listened to and witnessed. And it doesn't necessarily matter that anything happens beyond that. But if a manager makes time for every person on their team on a regular basis to just sit down and say, hey, how's it going? With work, with not work, just like, I'm gonna give you my full, undivided, no email, no phone attention, even for 15 damn minutes. I'm just gonna sit and I'm gonna listen to anything you have to tell me. That alone could have unbelievable effects on their mental health, on their retention, on their feeling about you and feeling they trust you and the rest of the team, all of that.
Yeah. Quickly going off of that, there's a company called Listenly that was developed literally just to teach people how to be better listeners, and they do incredible workshops that I super recommend. And the biggest thing they teach is literally, you just ask your partner, what's big for you right now? What are you thinking about in your life? And they just talk to you for 20 minutes. You set a timer for 20 minutes, which sounds intimidatingly long. It's really not once you get going. And all you do is, if there's a pause, you ask them a question. And people just, I've seen them do this a bunch of times, they just unfurl. Like, people will start crying. It's so rare to have that much undivided attention on you. And as people, we just need that. We need to know that our experience is important and that someone is there to listen, because that kind of makes it more real.
Sure. Well, it builds in this sense of like, it's all about creating that time and holding that space and keeping it sacred, right? And making sure that teams, regardless of what they're going through, regardless of the massive changes in the markets and industries that are rumbling beneath our feet, that you can, I love that phrase, that you can just hold that and know that will make your team stronger, right?
Yeah.
What I'm also curious about is there are a good amount of technologists in the room, right? And we mentioned this play between the physical and the virtual, and I'm sure that there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of virtual communities that are popping up, and ways that people are finding belonging, not interfacing with someone one-on-one. What are some tips or lessons that you've learned in sort of how do you foster belonging with digital, with virtual, with not in person?
You want me to kick this off?
Kick it.
So I'd say that one thing is to create a sense of place. So if I deal a lot of times with somebody starting a new co-working community, and they say, how do I get people, my community members, talking to each other outside of the space, online? We created a Slack channel. Everyone's in a Slack channel. Nobody's talking. So, or there's only a few people, or whatever it is. And so what we try to do is say, okay, we're going to create some perception that this Slack channel or wherever the online community is activated during a very specific time of the day and day of the week when there's going to be an interesting prompt, and it's going to be very finite. It might only be for an hour or two or whatever it is, where everyone's going to check in and they're going to post their, their stand-up, or they're going to post their favorite win of the week, or even you could say for 15 minutes, everyone just post the silliest thing you possibly can, right? And this is the window, and you can just really let it all out, be totally silly, totally off topic, not work related, go to town, and we're just gonna have some fun and be silly. Sure. But there's this sense of tangibility that my Slack channel for my co-working community might be dead for every other hour of the week, but at Monday at 10 o'clock, everyone's there, and everyone's active, and it's very vibrant and alive. Sure. So that's one thing. The other thing is, again, looking for ways for people to connect one-on-one, or getting vulnerable, that kind of thing. But if you can get people to meet in person once, even just once, and do a really, really good job of it, then I've found that you can maintain that relationship online for many, many years afterward. There are people that I've met through the co-working movement that I've gotten close to through the online communities, but when we meet one time in person, now I know that person, and I might never have to meet them again for us to have a very vibrant online relationship through these forums.
Sure.
That feels true for me too.
Yeah?
Tony answered that better than I could. That's a great answer.
How do we translate this fostering belonging for an entire city? How does this happen at scale, right? I feel like this is almost a selfish question, right? Because so many people in the tech space and in the startup space are always thinking about scale, right? The one-on-one is fantastic, the ability to activate people is fantastic, but how does this translate for thousands, and in your case, millions of people?
I'm wiggling because I'm so excited about this question. I'm just I want to answer this question.
Yes.
Because this is the thing that we are still figuring out, and this is literally why all of you are here right now, is because we need all of your help to actually make this thing work. But what we've started thinking is, okay, great leaders empower other people to be leaders. This thing is not about the two of us hosting a bunch of events and somehow 1 million people show up. That is crazy, and that is way too us-centered, and that is not in alignment with our values anyways.
Sure.
So what we're seeing is that the best way to reduce loneliness, obviously, is to bring people together. And there's already all of these open source, easy ways to bring people together that exist out there. Some really simple examples, our friend Kurt hosts this thing called Poetry Lunch every Wednesday. There's a different prompt every week, your friend Kurt as well.
Yeah.
And everyone just gets together and reads a poem about the topic. And the first time I went, 3 people cried. I was just what is this? This is incredible. These people don't even know each other. But the fact that it's okay, we're all gonna get together, we're gonna eat food, and we're gonna participate in some soul-based art. Incredible, so rare, so nice to have that time in the week. And so to say, okay, what if we publish what Tony would call this recipe for belonging, this recipe for step-by-step how you host a poetry lunch. Super simple. We have a network of people who have all raised their hand and said, I want to create a space for people to come together, but I'm not sure what to do. We blast out this recipe for belonging to all of these people. Suddenly, there's hundreds of people around the world hosting a poetry lunch. And what if we did that with a ton of different recipes for belonging, giving all different types of people ways to bring people together? That's what we want to do. That's what we need all of your help with. And I'm sure you all probably had a bunch of thoughts of like, oh, but this thing wouldn't work, or like, oh, that thing could be better. And that's why we need to talk to all of you, because this is just an idea that we're talking about with a few people, and we're super excited to just get a big group of people excited about this.
And I'll just add, this isn't coming out of nowhere. This is building on what we've personally
Yes.
experienced. I saw this happen naturally with the co-working movement and with that thing in the living room, Jelly, which is just like an informal gathering that anybody could, there's jellies all over the world, and many of them led to co-working spaces. With so many of the events on the Joy list, a lot of them are events that are scaling up to other cities. Some of them are in a bunch of other cities. Some of them have just gotten started. And we know, talking to the founders of those communities, they're building some really great little local gathering. And now they're getting emails from people all over the world saying, I love this idea. Can I do it in my city? And they're like, I barely know what I'm doing in my city. And now, now you want me to tell you how to do it in your city? This is crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. So if we can help those people with a good idea, somebody like Kurt with Poetry Lunch, take their thing from one city to 100, then we're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is a great segue into kind of the theme of questioning everything, right? Because I love it. Like we chatted back and forth, and it's this. We need to learn from more people, right? To make all this happen. And there's something so magical about these lessons of how do you create and hold space, right? How do you make sure that you set aside, what you said, it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes to make sure that people know that they have an opportunity to talk about what's exciting, right? And be able to scale that to these virtual communities and these entire cities of people, right? But knowing that empowerment is the way that you get there, right? Which transitions us very naturally, I might add, to the second part of kind of why we're all here, right? So we've migrated from the chat, which thank you, by the way. It's great to hear your expertise and learn from you, into something that's a little more interactive, right? So we'll start with just thinking about a question that's about to appear on the screen. Then in the next, call it 2 minutes, you'll talk to someone next to you, and it can either be someone brand new or it can be someone you came with. Because I guarantee you might not have discussed this with that person you came with before, which I think is fun. And then you'll kind of pair up into little groups of 4, and then we'll have a larger group discussion on this question. All right? So the question is, where in New York City do you feel like you belong?
I got it.
So something that's meant to be personal, right? It can be something so simple or something so profound. Looking at John, he's got something profound on his mind, I can tell. But go ahead, just for a couple minutes, just think about this question. Where in New York City do you feel like you belong?
And Aaron, I want to add,
Yeah.
in case anybody really is stumped, like if they think the answer is literally nowhere, like maybe dive into that some more, like explore that, and let's play with that a little bit too.
Nowhere is an okay answer.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right. So think about that for a couple minutes.
Oh, hey, we're at Alpha right now. A bunch of people are talking about where they feel like they belong in New York City.
That's right. Yeah. Question everything. So we're getting them to question
everything.
Yeah. Where they.
Hey,
all
these
right.
guys are fantastic.
Yeah.
This has just been so much fun. This has been so great. Thank you so much.
We're having fun. We're having a good time.
having fun.
Yeah, so the idea we're trying to work with here is we're just trying to show people the power that they have to do something about this issue of loneliness and belonging. Because unlike a lot of other problems in the world that maybe we don't have as much power over, when it comes to belonging, we actually have a lot of power to learn how to belong to ourselves. And we have a lot of power to foster a sense of belonging amongst people that we know, our neighbors, our friends, maybe even people we don't know so well, just through very, very simple actions. So we're just trying to make that easier and easier for people to really feel like they can take action to help out with.
What do you guys say about that?
Amen. True.
So let's start with a little discussion. So I'm curious to see if someone wants to stand up and just share a little bit about what they were talking about. Just as simple as that. I'll open up the floor. Yeah, go for it, George.
One common theme that started from our discussion was we all came here in this
area for this, this event for a reason, right? We're all really passionate about a certain topic, this topic in particular, and we all just took time out of our day to come here with, talk with like-minded people and, get that sense of community. So this is where I feel like I belong.
So someone else, what do you think? How does this question speak to you? Yeah, Henry.
Here, hold on. Hi, my name is, there we go, got it. Hi, my name is Henry Pierre. This is my dragon Max. And he has been the key of my success, and the place I belong the most in this city is the Museum of Modern Art. I turned the Museum of Modern Art into my co-working space. On the second floor of that museum, there's a huge window that has a desk that faces the garden. 20 years ago, I started going there, put my computer down, and started working. Now, as a result of being there for so long, I'm their fixture. I am friends with almost practically all the security staff. I have met everyone from Vin Vendors to Wes Anderson to all kinds of crazy people at that museum. All I did was I just showed up. There was no agenda. I just said, this museum and I are partners. Let's go for it. Thank you.
Yes. I love that. Let's grab one more. I love this kind of thread that's happening. Who else was kind of spoken to by this question? Yeah, go for it, Christine.
I don't know. So I guess mine's a lot different from other people's. I think what makes me feel like I belong in New York is going to furniture showrooms, especially because I've worked in Soho since the early 2000s, and I feel like I belong. I'll go sit in another living room that's not mine, imagine myself there. But what I found when I would do that, just to get some free space in my own head, was just to listen to what other people are saying. Like, they talk about their future while they're there. They talk about what they want in their house. They're imagining the same other life they could have in New York in these spaces, and all walks of life go to these. And you just feel like, this is why I'm in New York. It's very diverse, it's different. And being alone in New York is what actually makes me feel like I belong, because you realize like everyone came here for similar reasons, and we're all different, and we're all amazing. And that's kind of like what draws me to New York.
Sure.
Just like that.
Is it, I'm going to stay on this theme for a little bit, because is it the shared interest that builds that sense of belonging, or is it almost this sense of you come from such different places, but you can share something so simple?
Well, as a user experience person, a researcher, I think that you go to Crate and Barrel and you hear a different type of conversation. You hear people have like marital problems. They're like, but I like this, I want it fluffy and soft. I like it to feel stiff or modern. Or you go to Blue Dot and they're like, I really love how austere this is. You just hear a different type of conversation, but it's all relevant and it's different, and you realize there's just so much humanity in the furniture and why it was designed. You question the aesthetics. You can have an aesthetic conversation in your head. Again, you could be a voyeur, you're just there. But you're in someone else's space and you can transport yourself. And I love that New York gives you a quality of transporting whatever world you want to live in. Each day you can change it. It's not the same place.
Sure.
Incredible answer.
Yeah. we got another chair so you can sit. Yeah.
I feel like we got more good tips in the audience now.
Yeah.
More places, your secrets of places you go. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So who had a specific place in mind? So like a restaurant or a library, or I love that we had the Museum of Modern Art mentioned, right? Who had a specific place in their mind? Yeah.
Okay. I thought of my hot yoga studio. I know that sounds a little bit basic, but I feel like in this studio, everyone's doing the same activity and everyone's going through the same movement, and there's such diverse people that are in the studio, and I think as a woman, I think any woman struggles with body image and how they look, and I feel like in that studio, I'm not self-conscious of my body, which I think is actually a big deal for a person.
Sure.
So that's what I thought.
Yeah.
There's research on, it's called collective effervescence, but if you do synchronized movement together, you actually feel bonded to people. The only thing that you feel more bonded to people in a quick amount of time is group singing, but it's like group singing and then group dancing or like synchronized movement. So like it totally makes sense to me that you're with these people, and because you're all doing the same thing, you feel this sense of cohesion.
Sure.
Science.
Yeah, well, I mean, show of hands, how many people thought of something that had started with that, it was blank effort.
Oh, collective effervescence.
Collective
It's like
effervescence.
you're all singing together, you're all dancing together. What was your name?
Yeah.
Let's see if is it working?
Yeah, go for it.
Mine was the dog park at Prospect Park, because it's this low pressure place that we all show up in our pajamas way too early with our dogs and we don't really talk. But there's this collective effort, and we're all kind of talking to each other's dogs and not one another, and but gradually over going every single day, you start to recognize people and form friendships, or you have to like ask for a poop bag or something, and then like your dogs are friends, and then you become friends, and it feels very organic. So yeah, that idea of like you can I'll take walks with people and I have no idea what their name is. But it's just this nice feeling of belonging that's very low pressure too, and like hot yoga, very there's no focus on aesthetics.
Have you felt that? Does someone have something to build, or? So I'm curious. You mentioned this sense of helping, like where you wanted to, because it was. Like if you needed something, you could provide it to someone, and if you needed it, they could provide it to you. Is that a piece of feeling like you belong, like feeling like you have something to give to someone, or you have the ability to kind of help someone?
Sure. I think having something in common, if you have a question about like where'd you get your dog's coat or something, then you can figure out like where the best pet store is. Like small things like that now I know where I can take my dog because they have the bones she likes, and then I see the same people there. So it is sort of that you find different commonalities. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of gets back to your point. Oh, go for it. Yeah, go for it, Allison.
This is not a build.
No, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we were having an interesting conversation about when you move to New York, there might be some native New Yorkers here, but probably a lot of us are not. And so when you move to New York, there's the pivotal question of where do you live, right? And when I moved to New York 7 years ago, it was like in my high school best friend's college apartment. 3 women in a 1-bedroom. Not fun. So from there, if you've lived in New York more than say a year or two, then there's always the question of where you're going next. And Brooklyn. So, and then after Brooklyn, there's the question of like, okay, well, do I belong here? And I think we both kind of had this funny realization that like we might never belong in Manhattan. I've never encountered somebody who lives in Manhattan, unless they're from Manhattan, who really feels like they belong here. But I would love to be proven wrong. Oh, amazing. Okay, there's a couple. That's good to hear. But then I think most of us end up going to the outer boroughs, right? So I've lived in all the outer boroughs except for Staten Island, because I won't. But nothing wrong with Staten Island. I landed in the Bronx because that's where my dad's from, and I just connected with my neighborhood. And I think this question of belonging in New York City is so closely tied to neighborhood. A lot of people, based on our conversation and just my experiences in Brooklyn, I think a lot of people like Brooklyn because the parts of Brooklyn that have gentrified are full of transplants, and it's nice to be a transplant among transplants. But then what happens when you go to a place where most of the people are natives? And that's what I experienced when I moved to the Bronx, to my specific neighborhood there. And I'm not a native, but my dad is from there, and I heard stories my whole life of his growing up there, and it was this very wild experience of showing up in a place where I'm not from, but I feel like I'm from, and then discovering that when you're an outsider in some spaces in New York City is going to ask you, pardon my French, but why the fuck are you here? Yeah. So that happened to me a lot, and then I think that's the magic of New York, is like it hardens you, and then if you stay long enough, it softens you. And I just implore anybody who doesn't feel belonging in New York to go find a different neighborhood, because your neighborhood is not the problem. It might be something internal, maybe a conversation you're having with yourself, for your life, for your choices, but like where you live has a huge impact on everything from like your style, to the way you walk, to the food you eat, to the kinds of people you encounter. And there's a lot of parts of Brooklyn that are totally insulated, parts of Manhattan, even parts of the Bronx and Queens and Staten Island, insulated from that struggle with self. So I found it in the Bronx, but you might find it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Hours about all
like everyone give their answer now. This is so cool.
No, go for it. Do you have something?
Yeah, well, I want to talk. We could expand on literally every response here, but I do want to, plus one the notion of neighborhood. I think there's a lot.
Tony, where do you live?
I live in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and I'm still working on the belonging thing. But I think that there's a lot of untapped opportunity we have to foster a sense of belonging in our neighborhoods through pretty simple things we do. And actually, a lot of the places that were mentioned, I think there's things that maybe we can do to further this sense of belonging. So if I do go to the dog park every morning, we have this sense of camaraderie, but we kind of mostly leave each other alone. Are there ways that maybe we can work with that a little bit, foster some conversation? Does the yoga studio have the ability to maybe host like a social for the members of that studio? So, because I know like if I go to a yoga studio, there's like before, when we're all getting dressed and ready, and then we're doing yoga, and then after, and like there's no real like facilitated time to get to know your people.
Sure.
For most studios, so like, but we all are going to like work on getting better together. So there's all this untapped opportunity, and it might just be as simple as adding this little extra mix of facilitated connection to all of a sudden really kind of bring a lot of people together.
Well, it builds on. Oh, go for it, Jillian. Yeah.
No, I just said amen.
Amen.
Well, churches too, yeah.
Yeah, also churches.
It builds on one of your lessons of being able to kind of build in a ritual where you're able to really kind of create a certain space for people to connect together, right? That 15 minutes on a Slack channel, right? Translate this to a company, right? Who may have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of users who are all fairly interconnected, right? Who all kind of share this similar connective tissue of using a service or visiting a site or being engaged by a type of content, but being able to engage them with this sense of, all right, for even an hour of your month, we're all going to meet and we're all going to share this sense of belonging because we have either a similar interest, we found a similar place that we love to be, or we found a similar way that we like to feel when we're with that organization, right? When we're with those people. I think that's really powerful for any organization with any amount of resources to be able to build on, right?
This is the thing I was literally talking to Dennis, who is here, who is my roommate and friend. I went to a play last night, and it's incredible. It's called Beyond Babel. Super recommend it. It's like a urban dance version of Romeo and Juliet, and it's so beautiful. It's so emotional and just like very powerful. But it was really interesting. So it's like this whole commentary on immigration and love, and like I was crying at the end, and then it's like, cool, it lights up, and now everyone leaves. And I just got home, and I had to like word vomit at Dennis like all my feelings about what had just happened, because there was no time to kind of like turn to people around me and share how I felt, or if there was, I felt kind of like I was breaking a social norm by doing that. Which is like, what if after, I always think this after plays and movies, like there was just like a prompt that the little narrator person gives of like, hey, if you're feeling like you want to talk, like turn to someone and say like, what's your experience with finding belonging in America? I was just like, that room would have exploded in conversation because everyone just had this incredibly emotional experience. Like at conferences, same thing. Like I spoke at Startup Grind, and at the end of my talk, my talk was about creating connection. And I was like, at the end of my talk, I just said, hey, turn to someone who you don't know and introduce yourself from the perspective of someone who loves you. So like, how would your mom introduce you? How would your best friend introduce you? Turn to someone you don't know and say that. And the security guard came up to me afterwards and he said, I've been working this conference for years. I have never seen everyone stay in the auditorium between speakers. Everyone stayed and talked to each other. It's like, yeah, because they all want to. We all want to talk to each other when we just learn something. We want to process, we want to connect. But it's just this weird thing where we kind of need an authority figure to give us permission.
Yeah.
To just do it. And then we're like, oh, okay, cool, we all know this is fine now. We can actually do it. It's cool.
You know what I kind of want to do? I kind of want to test that real quick.
Great.
So,
Cool.
I'm on a stage. I'm in a chair. I'm 4 inches elevated, I guess. Let's take 2 minutes, and to someone you didn't talk to about this question, introduce yourself in the way that someone loves you.
You might need to get up for this if you just
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
someone.
Let's do that. So go ahead and get up. Find someone for the. We're fine. Yeah. For the ability to kind of have this time to share with you all, right? We've talked tonight about holding space, about keeping space sacred, about the ability to connect with other people, about the ability to learn their story. And whenever I host an alpha event, there's a quote that sticks in my mind so well. And it speaks to what we do as an organization, the ability to hear from people, to supercharge human-centered design, to make the experience of validating and testing your ideas so much stronger. And it's this notion that, frankly, it's impossible not to love someone once you've heard their story. And for me, that rings so true, right? And whether it's an hour every quarter, an hour every month, an hour every week, it could be 20 minutes with your manager, with a fellow member of your team. I think that there's something that's just really, really kind of cool about the ability to have that. And so on behalf of Alpha, on behalf of our team, on behalf of the space that we're in, I want to say thank you for being here. And we have a couple calls to action to make sure that the conversation does not end here, to make sure that no one leaves feeling like they don't belong, right? Because this is what tonight is all about. And so there are a couple opportunities to further learn, and I want to make sure that Jillian and Tony have a chance to speak about the initiative and ways that they can engage with people.
Sure. So joylist.nyc/partner. This is kind of a placeholder landing page for the stuff that Jillian and I are doing together. But this is kind of the starting point for our effort to figure out how to build a campaign to help 1 million people find belonging. And so what we're doing is we're creating a directory that anyone can contribute. Where do you find belonging? So we can learn more about what's out there. Because we have some answers, but we know that we know there are so many more answers we don't have yet. We are posting a regular series of video and blog post updates on this topic, so you can check out the updates and subscribe there. And then you can just fill out the form if you want to help, if you want to participate, and in particular, if you are with an organization that might be interested in sponsoring this endeavor. On the one level, just fighting loneliness, which I think is a really great thing for any brand to be a part of. Sure. But then specifically, if your company might want to actually sponsor the development of new gatherings around a topic that's maybe adjacent to your brand, we want to work with you to make that happen. What did I forget?
You nailed it.
Okay.
You nailed it.
Right.
So that's that thing. The second one, I'm so excited for that. I feel like I just totally cut you up. But yeah,
Cool.
We're so excited to talk to all of you about this. As Tony said, we don't know what we don't know. We're really excited to partner with Alpha because of the data aspect of things. Of how do we track if people feel like they belong? Again, this conversation was just a little start of that. I have no idea how we're going to measure that, and it's so important to be able to measure these things because we want to show to people that what we're doing works. And I'm coming from the side of things I'm very heart-centered. I'm not a data person, but I know that it's really helpful to have science to back up saying, hey, if you do this thing, this impact happens, so that we have a reason to be able to scale these things in the future. So again, please help us with this. We need a lot of help. And the second link, that's my book. Just right. My book, that's what that is.
Do you have any copies of it?
I snuck a bunch of copies into their bookshelf over there. I put some copies on your bookshelf. So if you want one, there's 4 on that bookshelf over there.
Nice.
But it's about how to create a feeling of belonging outside of organized religion, how to feel like you belong to yourself, how to feel like you belong to your community.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then from our end, we want to keep this conversation going, right? We recognize that there's a lot of different individuals in the room tonight, founders, folks from corporate America, people in product, people in technology, people in design. And these types of conversations are things that we all kind of, at least in my belief, that we just kind of need, right? Whether it's the ability to kind of break out of the normal professional development or panels and talks. And so if this sort of conversation, if this sort of event, if this sort of experience is something that's intriguing to you, we'd love to continue the conversation, and that can happen on an exclusive LinkedIn group that you are all invited to called Building the Future. So if you go to alphahq.com/buildingthefuture, you'll find that group, and you'll be added to several hundred, I think it's 300. But it's a few folks around the world that kind of share this same sentiment that we should all be questioning everything because every answer we get has the ability to build a better future, right? With that, we want to say thank you very much. There's one extra thing that we want to mention, and that is...
So we want to mention that we want to keep the conversation going after this event. We recommend around the corner there's a great bar called Spring Street Lounge. If you like hot dogs, they're free tonight, so that's another fun selling point. We recognize that some people might want to continue having a conversation after this event is done, so just wanted to give you an idea that there is a space around the corner that you can continue on your own as well.
Fantastic. We're honored to have you all here. Have a fantastic night. Thank you so much.